Hey folks, welcome to The Sacred Speaks. My name is John Price and I'm your host. Today I'm excited to introduce, you may already know him, Tony Bossis. He's become a fast friend and he's deep into a world that I am captivated totally by. The intersection of psychology, spirituality, mysticism, death, healing. He's a psychologist, and before I actually start off going off on that, let me read his bio and then we'll get to a number of updates for the podcast and then we'll get started. So Anthony P. Bossis, PhD, is a clinical psychologist and clinical assistant professor of psychiatry at NYU's School of Medicine, conducting FDA-approved clinical research with the psychedelic compound psilocybin for over a decade. Dr. Bossis was director of palliative care research and co-principal investigator on the 2016 landmark clinical trial demonstrating a significant reduction in emotional distress from a single psilocybin session in persons with cancer, specifically a rapid decrease in depression, anxiety, hopelessness, and demoralization, along with improvements in spiritual well-being and the quality of life. He is study director and lead session guide on a clinical trial evaluating psilocybin-generated mystical experience upon religious leaders. His primary psychedelic research interests include the treatment of end-of-life existential distress and advancing our understanding of consciousness, meaning, and spirituality. Dr. Bossis is a trained supervisor of psychotherapy at NYU Bellevue Hospital Center and co-founder of the Bellevue Hospital Palliative Care Service. He's a faculty member for the Center for Psychedelic Therapies and Research Certificate Program at the California Institute of Integral Studies and for the Art of Dying Institute in NYC. He has a long-standing interest in comparative religion, mysticism, and the interface of psychology and spirituality. He maintains a private psychotherapy and consulting practice in New York City. And Tony, thanks for being here. This was a fantastic interview. I've got links to, if you look below, I've got links to the chapter that I think is coming out. It may be out in the Handbook of Medical Hallucinogens. Tony's a fantastic guide, a fantastic deep thinker. He's been thinking about these ideas a lot for a very long time, as you'll hear in the interview. And I just feel grateful to know him. So Tony, thank you for your time, and thank you for the work that you put out into the world. You have a fun and loving nature about you, and I feel grateful to know you. Part of the thread here is when Brian Muraresku, and if you watched the last podcast with Mark Airy, Tony brought Mark into this group, and they've been talking for a long time. So I'm a bit of a new man on in the crew. But it's great to be among these healers, people who are reflective and think intentionally and deeply about meaningful aspects of our psychology, our health and our wellness, and our culture, and the ways in which human beings make sense of reality. So thank you, Tony. And then, of course, I referenced Mark. Check out that episode. And again, check out the episode with Brian Muraresku. Okay, so for now, I'll just get to a couple of updates. If you're new to The Sacred Speaks, welcome. This is on video, and it's also on audio. You can check out The Sacred Speaks in any of the podcast affiliates, from Spotify to iTunes and Google Play, also on SoundCloud and others. And if you're listening to this, go check it out on YouTube. Be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps as we're growing this community. And if you're watching this, be sure to like and subscribe the audio, and check out the Instagram page, Facebook page, all those places. Thank you for participating, but most of all, check out the website at thesacredspeaks.com. I've got plenty of information about the project and how this part of the project fits in a larger whole. Check that out when you can. The Sacred Speaks is supported, sponsored by the Center for the Healing Arts and Sciences, a boutique integrative practice that my wife, Leila Scott Price, and I started a number of years ago. And it's a fantastic space that we're growing in Houston. Check that out at the centerforhas.com. Again, links will all be below. And the music is from Modern Nations. Check them out at modernnationsmusic.com. The class that I just taught, that Brian Muraresku came and checked into, was fantastic. It was a great group of folks. Thank you for everybody being there. And if you'll check out the Young Center's website at younghouston.org, JUNGHouston.org, you'll find another class that Mark Ryan and a number of other folks, including Pam Stockton, are teaching. They're going to go through, it's more of a book study of Brian's book, The Immortality Key. Check that out with the Jung Center. It'll be a deeper dive. We were doing certain theoretical aspects of religion and psychology and spirituality, and they're really diving into the book. But again, thank you to all the people that participated in the class. Okay, other than that, I think that'll do it for now. We'll leave it there, and thank you, Tony, and all the participants. Always, thank you. I'm honored by everybody's presence, and I feel completely blessed to be doing what I'm doing. You're helping a geek do what I love. So thanks, and for now, we'll leave it there, and I'll bring you the interview. You and I have been kind of tracking the idea of this conversation for a while. I'm happy the day's here. Thanks for making the time, man.
Jen, I'm so happy to be here. I really respect the show you've been doing, and I'm really delighted. I look forward to this, and I've been enjoying our conversation so far in our relationship.
Me too, man. Yeah, me too. So cool.
Let's 10 minutes now. We should have recorded that, but we'll do it again.
We got some time to meander around together. So let's chart a course here. You know, you sent me your chapter. There was a Q&A you sent me. I watched your TED Talk, and of course, Fantastic Fungi. I've watched all this, read all this. As we said earlier, that chapter you wrote is spot on. You condensed and articulated so much of what's necessary for people to understand about the world of entheogens or psychedelics. And I know you've done a lot of these conversations, so let's kind of pay homage to what we need to pay homage to, but then go off book wherever we need to go off book. But first, I think one of the valuable things about connecting with you is your understanding of both, as you just said, the mystical aspects of this, but also the scientific aspects of this. And I think in you is a great and powerful integration to be able to speak to both these. So we'll kind of mine in and out of both those lanes throughout our conversation.
Yeah, and those are great lanes to address, because as we'll get into today, and I'll say a bit here in the opening, actually, the field of psychedelic research and the landscape is just expanding rapidly. It really is. And I really, it behooves the researchers in the field to stay in touch with the heart of the matter, which many of the researchers feel is this mystical experience, but it can get sometimes lost in the broader conversation of biology and this kind of marriage, this tension between biological reductionism and a new Prozac versus it's the memory of the insights of these experiences that go back millennia. And we'll do a deeper dive into this. That may be our birthright or our essence and the foundations of the major religions versus just a new pharmaceutical therapeutic. And it's a real interesting and two lanes. And it does behoove us to kind of keep an eye on one while we also cultivate the science. So it's an interesting time for the field.
When did you get into it?
I got into it really young. I'm giving away my older age here. Probably 40 years ago, and like many of us, began with TM. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, and when I was in college in the late 70s, and like countless others, really discovered the works of Watts and Jung in a very deep way, and Huxley and all the perennial philosophical writings, and smattering of religious readings. And then, and as a kid, actually, before that, even I, like a lot of kids, I think, I struggled with this death stuff, right? Lie in bed at night, wondering, death, what happens, and have that kind of anxiety. And it's undoubtedly, it drove my interest in end of life and palliative care and the mystical experience and religion. And then in the late 70s, early 80s, came across all this literature on psychedelics. Discovered Huxley's writings on psychedelics and Alan Watts and Albert Hofmann, and then the research of the 60s. And of course, this is pre-internet, so it's incredible to look back within our lifetime. The way we found this stuff was you went to the NYU Public Library and the microfiche, and you'd find newspapers or articles about this stuff from the 50s and early 60s that was around on psychedelics, or you found those old books from Leary and Ram Dass and you found them in the back of the used bookstores, right? So everyone knows from that era the way you found good books in the 70s and 80s was you went to the used bookstore in your town. I grew up out on Long Island, so that's every town had a used bookstore. You went right to the back. You passed the front desk, you went to the very back of the store. And there was always a shelf where the title was philosophy, metaphysics, or religion. And then you dropped to your knees, which is always a good metaphor. And on the bottom shelf was where you found, Watts and Huxley and all these great books. And that became one of our libraries from those days. And that really changed me. I had been interested in the mystical experience at the core of the major religions. I grew up Greek Orthodox, and we can speak about the specific religions today, and been very influenced by Zen and Vedanta Hinduism as well. And that this mystical experience could, provide not only insight into maybe the nature of self and what is consciousness, but it could alleviate end of life distress in these patients that I was reading about. And that really triggered my interest in this as a career. And I changed career. I was going to be a lawyer, go to law school. And it wasn't a good career move because in early 80s, there was no field, there was no psychedelic field, but I made the commitment. I'm not, I want to pursue that. And, as it turned out, got very lucky and a lot of gratitude that I'm, along with many others, doing the research. So that was the beginning. And that really, I found it profound that these medicines were once used. At that point, they weren't around. So it was just like, how is this not known now? How is these discoveries and these findings and the capacity for humans to tap into the mystical experience, which happens naturally as well. We'll get into that. But how these medicines not available now, and why is this not part of the human conversation? And I still think about that because it's kind of been pushed out of the conversation. The whole mystical experience conversation is pushed out. Alan Watts talks about that. So that kind of set the course. And then pursued, my graduate degrees. And for a while, there was nothing happening in the field, clearly, and became a psychologist and continued those explorations of Jung and everything else and consciousness. And then, after 2000, late 2000s, we began to do the work. I got lucky in that regard. So that was
hang on, you're skipping over something that I think is important because you're talking about coming into this field in a time where a lot of prohibition was going on in this field. And there was a lot of propaganda out there to scare people about what psychedelics or entheogens are all about. So you must have had a great deal of grit to be able to navigate and kind of, I guess the real question I'm trying to get at is, how were you exploring these ideas in an academic context when there was a lot of tension around these ideas? Were you getting shit from your professors, or were they saying this is bullshit, don't do that? What was the kind of emotional and psychological and sociological space at that time?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There was no landscape. There was no academic discipline. I didn't speak about it openly in my educational training. I'd taken off a number of years and explored it on my own, like many of us did in those days. And there was always small circles of people who spoke about this. But yeah, it wasn't part of the culture. These drugs had been completely pushed off the cultural landscape and the academic clinical landscape. When I began graduate school, I was, some teachers who were supportive of it, but I, danced around the edges. So you do research, or you speak about meditation and consciousness, and you didn't quite always talk about the psychedelics as a possible avenue. But looking back, it just, it's a bit, looking back, it's moving that, because I, like all of us in the field, and and you as well, when you have that passion, when you discover that, oh my God, this is an available possibility for people to have to explore that experience. It really could change your the path you set. And looking back, it did. I mean, I'm grateful. I'm not a lawyer. Nothing against lawyers, but it worked out well, and it's because of that. Discovered that entire, or I would have been I thought I'd maybe get an MDiv or be a priest or something like that, but it had to be around that topic of spiritual, religious experience, which again is the topic. These compounds we're researching, I don't think many of us don't categorize them as drug studies per se.
Yeah.
because the changeable, the change agent is the experience. What we call, we'll define today peak or mystical experience. The great Maslow talked about peak experience, and these compounds, temporarily shift the brain to temporarily give access to that incredible larger view of the landscape of consciousness that apparently has inherent in that of who we are. Uh, and so yeah, I think that's the topic, and so that's why I think this field dovetails well with philosophy and comparative religion and
Yeah.
and all that.
So what were you researching when you were doing your doctorate?
So my PhD was not around these medicines. My
Yeah.
my dissertation was on schizophrenia. So it was not around this. I was interested in it. I was exploring it on my own, and making connections to people who were doing this as well. Again, much of that's pre-email, and it's not until the early 2000s that uh, it began to percolate within the healthcare landscape. And then in 2006, I, before that, written letters to people and trying to get things going, and it was just really very difficult for obvious reasons. I had some attempts at where I worked at Bellevue early on, and the landscape wasn't really set yet. Then in 2006, the Hopkins team produced their great paper on kind of replicating the Good Friday experiment. We'll get to that today, and showing that psilocybin could produce in healthy volunteers a mystical type experience. And so that I think opened the doors a bit, and the floodgates. And then we got approval from the hospital and FDA, and that was the cancer study that was published in 2016. It took almost a decade to get that out. But yeah, no, the early days was not about psychedelics. It was just a conventional clinical psychoanalytic contemporary subjective New York City psychotherapy kind of paradigm. But on the edges, always diving deep into Jung and the religious models, which I still think are profoundly important. Religion's taken a big hit. It has for centuries, and there's a lot of ways why it went off the rails, and a lot of danger has been done. But those six silos of the great religions and others, I guess, are important containers as ways to connect to the ineffable, to go beyond the framework, or to paraphrase Paul Tillich, the religion beyond religion. I mean, versus just take each one as the endpoint. So that was how it unfolded, and just grateful now for over a decade now. We're deep into the science of psychedelics, and hopefully more than the science, also the reason why it works, and the impact on consciousness and spirituality.
Yeah, and a phrase comes to mind, Tony, as I'm listening to you talk about this, and it's if you want to understand something about life, understand something about death.
Yeah.
And that's been a major factor of your research. When did that start?
Yeah, so that it remains the primary focus. The field's really expanding, as I said a few minutes ago, and the two avenues that really engage my interest is one, end of life and working with people who are dying with the medicine. I'll talk about that in a moment, and the other is just the nature of spirituality, building upon that great Good Friday experiment from 1962 with Walter Pahnke, where they looked at the impact of psilocybin on healthy volunteers. Houston Smith was a volunteer in that famous study, who famously said, a spiritual experience doesn't necessarily make a spiritual life. I mean, again, it's about what you do with it, not just the experience on its own. The end of life path I had been interested in, as I said, even as a kid, death and dying, and an existential framework. And like so many of us, was influenced by all the existential writers, and later on Yalom and all those works. And then came across that research that was done in the early 60s with the one LSD experience from these early studies at Spring Grove. People like Stan Groff and Bill Richards and others were doing that, could profoundly reduce the anxiety people had in their terminal cancer diagnosis, vis-a-vis that profound mystical experience that, and let me, I should define that in a moment, but let me just finish my sentence. And it just was the perfect application for my interests, both personally, because as a kid, I just struggled with death and dying, and then just interest in existential work and spirituality. Um, and I worked in palliative care for years. I had founded a palliative care clinic at Bellevue Hospital, and still work with people with advanced diagnoses. Uh, so that became our first study at Johns Hopkins and our team at NYU. We did a clinical trial looking at the impact of one dose of psilocybin in people with mostly with advanced cancer. Some didn't have advanced cancer; it might have been in remission, but the key inclusion criteria was to have had a significant psychological suffering secondary to it, so anxiety, depression, or some at that point DSM-4 diagnosis. And that was the paper we published in 2016 together, Hopkins and NYU, and which made a big splash. It was one of the first time, in addition to Charlie Grove's paper out of UCLA a couple of years earlier, that was done in almost half a century. And the only two primary indications to come out of the first wave of research, that really wild period, and I want to come back to it later with you because it's such an interesting chapter from the 1950s and 60s and early 70s, were two main indications. One was alcoholism, which many people don't know. Bill Wilson had taken LSD many times, and that became that experience, that peak mystical and numinous experience, became his cultivated his insight that a spiritual experience could serve as an ablation to want to drink. And even Jung spoke about that. If you merge with the greater good, it would maybe mitigate the need for the more lesser ways to merge with all that is. And the other avenue was this terminal cancer. And those are the only two clinical pathways to come out of that first wave. So it was really humbling to pick up on those great giants of the 1960s and 50s and early 70s and continue that work, which we're still continuing today. And it remains for me such a remarkable application of the medicine. And if we can mitigate end of life distress, which we all potentially will go through, might go through, just an incredible gift. And we'll dive deeper into this. Even Ralph Metzner, the great pioneer in psychedelic medicine, passed away a couple of years ago, said to his dying days that the most incredible application of this was to help those who are dying, and often cited the Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece and other models where these medicines could give a glimpse, maybe, into the nature of life and death, and be more present if we could remove that awful existential end of life terror.
Mm-hmm. It's ironic that religions other than I've one of those books, by the way, that I went into a used bookstore and I went to the very back. I found the book that Leary and Richard Alpert and Metzner wrote, Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Psychedelic experience, right?
Yes, yeah. So you started to talk about the used bookstore. I thought, shit, and it was a first edition too. So I've got a.
No, I understand. I think I got my version of that back in the same way. It was a book that was written, as you know, they took the Tibetan Book of the Dead about the Bardos, what might happen to the soul after death, and they made a kind of a metaphorical arc about the psychedelic experience, loss of ego death, kind of the parallels, and an interesting note in history that. When Aldous Huxley was dying, who was an influencer of all three of those guys, when he was dying, she read to him from a pre-published manuscript that hadn't been published yet, and reading to him about as he was passing away, and actually he requested she inject him with LSD as he passed away. Reading from that book, Go Towards the Light, Go Towards the Love, and reading from the manuscript. But yeah, see, today's kids, John, don't know about the bottom shelf of the used bookstore.
I guess While it's funny because I read your chapter and I want to just provide people an understanding of the kind of death that we're talking about. I want to read this little paragraph from your utility of psychedelics and palliative care. This is an excerpt from, I'm assuming, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. You are going forward and up. You are going towards the light. Willing and consciously you are going. You are doing this beautifully. You are going towards the light. You are going towards a greater love, light and free, forward and up. You are going towards the best, the greatest love, and it is so easy, and you are doing it beautifully, going forward and up towards the light, into complete love.
Mm. Yeah, so that always hearing you say those words. So those are Laura Huxley's words, reading to her husband as he lay on the bed, passing away, reading from that book. I get a chill as I hear you say them, and it goes on for pages. I mean, I have them here, so I was going to read them to you today, but I'm so glad you read it. It goes on for pages. That's a good book, by the way, to recommend, and I'll drop some books along the journey today. This Timeless Moment by Laura Huxley profiles her experience with that, and she's reading that for hours. Go towards the love, go towards the light. You're doing this beautifully. Keep going, honey. Keep going. Very touching. Yeah. And historically, interesting note, that was the same day JFK was assassinated in Dallas. She famously talks about coming out of the bedroom. Aldous had finally passed, and he was a very well-known person in those days in California and throughout the world. And the living room were all his friends and some pretty well-known people, and they were all huddled around the TV set. And she writes that she was thinking as she's approaching the crowd to tell them he just passed. That's a bit odd. They're all watching TV. What had happened was JFK had just been shot and killed. And she writes about that, how these are two great men who both were dedicated to kind of helping push humanity along a bit. It's interesting moment in time.
Well, certainly Westerners, we tend to have this, we project this process into an afterlife. And I don't want to get into a theological discussion necessarily, but we don't have the kind of, I think what we tend to do is fear death as opposed to discuss openly what kind of death an individual would like. That's a taboo conversation that we want to separate and push off to the side, and then try to have a fantasy that we can prolong our life longer than we probably need to. So the death conversation to me that you're looking at, aside from psychedelics, which I think are of course valuable and necessary, but to reanimate and bring into the foreground a conversation about death openly, I think it's one of the things that you're doing that is of such importance. And I appreciate the means by which you're doing it, because I think that we don't have enough of an orientation, not like this, not like, and I'm pointing to my used book section right down here, not like that.
Get on your knees and look at them
down there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're so right, and such gratitude for the people who are advancing this cause for a while now. It still is, as Ernest Becker famously wrote, that like the final taboo, right? I mean,
yeah,
death and dying, and it's incredible the level of denial. I mean, here we are, and you have this in you as well as me, and most people, despite knowing fully well we're going to cease to exist. There's that kernel of peace. Well, no, not me. I mean, that denial that can be within human experience. The good news is it's getting better, right? A little bit. In the last 15 years, 15, 20, 10 to 20, the hospice movement, the palliative care community, and the culture. There's been books now on top, New York Times bestsellers on death and dying, and there's death doulas and death cafes. And so, we're slowly inching our way towards a renewed, healthier cultural conversation about death. With giants like Kubler-Ross and others laying the seeds, many years ago, but it remains the final taboo, and it's the healthcare industry and medicine fell short, right? with the turn of the last century, with the medicalization of healthcare, and all its incredible discoveries, came sadly the uh, the moment or the period where they began to push death beyond closed doors, behind the closed curtain. It wasn't part of the daily life, as well as birth. So
Right.
for years, and even in the 1800s here in America, and people died in their homes. People died in their homes, and the body laid there for days, and it was part of the village experience and the family experience. And throughout history, there's various ways that death was part of the community. And only with modern the medicalization of death did it become kind of behind closed doors. And then birth as well. Until the mid-century, the husband can come in the room finally, or the partner, but that wasn't part of the early. As if there was no before or after, just just this. Where we come from, where we're going, we're not talking about. We're just here. So uh, that is changing. Still a long way to go.
Hmm.
And we're better at chemotherapy, John. We're better at pain control. There are still a paucity of tools to address the end of life distress that we can go through, that people go through. There are meaning making psychotherapies that are cultivated that help,
Hmm.
which I think form the set the table for these medicines, in that the two most, I think, and again, we'll come to the criteria in a little bit, features they generate are meaning making and transcendence. Um, but we don't die well in America. We still don't die well. Survey after survey shows most people want to die at home with loved ones, with a sense of completion and as best we can. And yet many people still die in ICUs and in, trying to advance the quantity of life for a little while longer versus a full appreciation for the quality of life.
Hmm.
So, but hats off to the entire palliative care and hospice communities. And there is a change, as you've seen, as people have seen in the bookstores and TV shows. We're getting there on a very cultural level, and healthcare is also catching up. And you know, not too long ago, you wouldn't talk about that in medical school. There wasn't training,
Wow.
you know, and palliative care teams existed for a while in hospital, but the doctors called you at the very last minute, like almost deliver the bad news for us, versus coming earlier to help the patient along this final trajectory of life. So, yeah, no, thank you for bringing that out. We're getting there, but it remains a big hole in our human conversation, that we die, and how can we make that more meaningful? How can we make it less painful? And how can we bring it into the circle of into the cycle of what life is? And which again, I mean, to circle back to religion, which we're gonna be dancing around all day. I get a sense
Right.
that's probably the foundation of the major religions, to help people understand or cope with that we're not always here, and also based on experiences of the religious founders or the mystics or however they came to be, was often about what might happen.
You
With,
said something earlier that is a phrase I want to tease out a little bit. You said the medicalization of healthcare. That seems a lot of people might go, "Huh? Well, isn't healthcare medicalized already?" Tell me more about that.
yeah, no, that's a big part of the conversation. So there's obviously clearly advantages to the medicalization of healthcare. We have modern medicine, we have antibiotics and pain control and discoveries. But the medicalization of death and dying and of healthcare pushed those conversations out behind closed doors. It removed, part of the human experience of the life cycles, including the end of life, focusing solely on, the medical applications to prolong life. And that was when it shifted in the early 1900s. Give or take a period of time, where death and our views upon death and our conversations shifted into this new paradigm, which we're now seeing change. We're now seeing a return to, more than a return, we're seeing a healthy attitude towards end of life. Again, all these incredible conferences, and the field itself is expanding, and the field itself is accepting psychedelic model in a very accepting way. as a way to alleviate end-of-life distress, which I am very heartened by, and we're getting full support by palliative care and hospice communities. Could this model, could the psychedelic treatment model be an application, not for everyone, but for many who are dying to have that to relieve the end of life suffering that is so common.
You know, it as I sent you the other, I know you already, I would imagine you already had it, but I sent you the article recently about the how Rick Perry down in Texas is approaching the Capitol, and which is, I mean, obviously, as somebody who's down in Texas, that was odd and also symbolic and an interesting move that projections noted here, but my projections onto that situation, he wouldn't be the candidate that I would imagine is going to the Capitol. But that's certainly I think an evidence of a massive shift that's coming when we have folks that have in large part really pushed up against the idea of subjectivity and the importance of the imagination. Because a byline that I think that you and I are going to really track is just that. It's where does the imagination sit? You know, here you start doing a dissertation on schizophrenia, looking at what are the hallucinations, what's happening in the subjectivity of an individual who is schizophrenic. Psychedelics, you're talking a lot about how important the experience is. So we're having this line of people, which is, I think, one of the conflicts that Freud and Jung really got themselves into. We have this massive schism between medicalizing analytic work and mysticizing, I guess, analytic work that really Jung was doing. So yeah, we're in a radical period of time. It's pretty amazing.
It is amazing. It does feel like, doesn't it, that we're, it's hard to know where you are in history when you're in it. You can't get a
Right.
bird's eye view of where you are, and each generation might think we're at an incredible point, and most generations are.
Yeah.
But this does have a feeling, and many people are, of course, saying this, that we're at some type of inflection point, that there seems to be some kind of paradigm shift in how we understand so many things, and of course the threats to human life and planet change and political models, and there's so much going on that this virus has been an incredible dharma lesson for all of us about the impermanence of life and the fleeting nature of this existence, and how we are all connected, that psychedelics teach us, literally connected. I mean, we're spreading this virus, but we also could spread other positive things through our interconnected interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh would call it. But also, this period seems to, and I think you're alluding to this, also approaching this, how do we revisit what is consciousness?
Yeah.
Which seems to be the final frontier of science, which of course Jung beautifully played around with. More than played around with, that's an insult to Jung. Explored. But what is consciousness? Where is consciousness? That seems, the hard problem, as they call it, that seems to be the final frontier. And things like near-death experiences and meditative experiences and spontaneous mystical experiences that we're addressing today, and psychedelic-generated mystical peak experiences. Could they be tools in helping us map out the phenomenology of consciousness? There's two ways of seeing consciousness, at least two primary ways. One, it's generated by this incredible brain function we have. And this incredible thing generates our consciousness, whatever that is. I mean, you're picturing something now in your head. Where's that picture? I mean, it's all so ineffable. The other pathway being addressed now in serious ways, called non-local consciousness, is that it might be even more remarkable than that. It might exist, the source of consciousness may exist in part outside biology, and that somehow, way beyond our understanding, clearly at this point in our evolution, the brain somehow mediates with or interfaces with whatever that is, and brings in all this experience. But it really is the final frontier in psychedelics. We hope we'll have a role in understanding that. Let me quickly just, if I could, John, if you don't mind, itemize quickly. There's only a few features. what I keep referring to as mystical experience, because I
Yeah,
don't want to leave
of
the
course.
listener. And this has been the heart of the research, actually, and it's been shown that the greater this experience, when this experience is endorsed, we see the greater clinical outcomes, particularly in the end of life study. So people in the cancer trials who had a mystical or peak experience had a greater reduction in anxiety, depression, demoralization, hopelessness, and a greater sense of spiritual well-being. And simply, and it builds, we build it proudly upon the early measures developed in the early 1960s by Walter Pahnke and Bill Richards, who's still a mentor and a teacher to us all. One is a sense of unity, that in this experience, the subjective experience that everything is connected. All things are connected. All is one. Profoundly felt. The sense of sacredness, awe, humility, wonder. The noeta quality, a term coined by William James, that one is encountering ultimate reality. In the hundreds of cases in the modern psychedelic era, as well as the first wave half a century ago, it's very rare. I've never heard it. A volunteer say, "Oh, that was just a temporary drug effect. That was some. It was kind of cool, and I saw everything as one." But they don't. The experience speaks with such authority that what they tell us and what they write about and what we're seeing in the results of the research, that was ultimate reality. That's part of reality. Whatever this is part of that, and that might be even the greater ultimate reality. And it's an incredible thing to hear over and over again, because that glimpse, that experience, was often laced for many people with insights that consciousness continues, or some very powerful spiritual insights about around self and death and the nature of all this. Um, Ineffability is another feature that just transcends language. It's impossible to speak about. Although I have to say they do a great job in writing beautiful journals about their experience. And finally, a feature that is very important, and it seems to me really one of the most important ones, is this sense of transcendence. People report in these experiences and in naturally occurring mystical experiences I want to talk about in a moment. Um, the sense of transcending time and space, as far out as that sounds, transcending this body, this full sense of transcendence that we see in meditation spontaneously, um, and for the person who's dying, I mean, whose body's beginning to fail. So in 2 weeks, 1 year, 6 months, whatever it is, this body will stop working. And of course, the association with that is, well, then I stop working. I cease to be. Insights cultivated in that transcendent experience often are in this research that whatever self is more than this body. I'm
Hmm.
not just this cancer. I'm not just this body. There's something more enduring about who I am, about what I am. Self is. What a gift. What a gift. Um, and people will say, appropriately so, well, that's just a temporary effect, and that's not really true or not. I mean, above my pay grade to really verify it one way or the other. But what a gift for these people who are, and it's spoken with conviction. So those are the features, and importantly, those occur without psychedelics as well. I mean, it's clear that psychedelics is one way, a fairly reliable way when done properly in the proper set and setting, and we can talk about how we do the trials that can generate that. But as Abraham Maslow wrote about beautifully, and others have, these experiences occur naturally throughout human history.
Hmm.
Mystics and saints and everyday people have these experiences. Maybe not the 3 or 4 hour one you see in a psychedelic experience, but these glimpses. Children have them. A recent Pew study showed 49% of Americans report having some kind of peak or religious experience. It seems to me we're wired for meaning. It really does. Why we're so separate from that is a question, again, above my pay grade, but it seems humans are wired for these experiences that form the foundations of the great traditions. And that's remarkable. Why is that? Why are we wired for? Why would that be? If how, from an evolutionary perspective, why would that be? And it's just an incredible um, notion or insight. And these medicines now in a reliable setting can generate that.
It is magical.
And
Okay.
reduce this in this situation, reduce end of life distress through incredible insights. And love is also often very part of that insight. That it's all the ground of being. Is love. But now we're seeing there's another applications in smoking cessation and depression and eating disorders. That one isn't published yet. Addiction. So you know, does this transcendent function, as Maslow called it, um, not only have insight? Opportunity for insight into who we are, which is just remarkable, and the nature of religion and spirituality, does it have clinical applications in therapeutics? And here we are at this new reimmersion of the medicine of the work, and it's exciting, exciting.
So, and I got two places I want to just this is what's on my mind right now. The idea of spiritual bypassing, that these are substances that somehow cheat what somebody could cultivate through 10 years of meditation. What do you say to that idea?
Uh, uh, I understand the question. I once gave a talk, and someone said, "Isn't that cheating? Isn't that Um, and I'll leave a lot open. A lot of mystery here. But Walter Stace famously said the psychedelic generated mystical experience isn't like a mystical experience; it is a mystical experience. So, I think, in fairness to the question, one, it does seem these experiences mirror specifically and almost identically the naturally occurring ones. I mean, the mystical experience scale I read out to you before was built upon the history of naturally occurring mystical experiences. Stace and others gleaned from James' work and Stace and all the major religions. What were the common themes? What were the common motifs that we see in these great experiences? Great book, by the way, and that is Richard Maurice Buck's 1902 Cosmic Consciousness, a classic in looking at naturally occurring experiences. So this was built upon when they occurred naturally. Is it cheating? Is it bypass? It can be, and that's where the problems are. Houston Smith famously said, I said to you, I think before you went on record, that a spiritual experience doesn't necessarily make a spiritual life. It's what you do with it. It's the application or the integration of it. So yes, there's another quote somewhere. You could be a stinker before a mystical experience and still be a stinker afterwards. If it didn't change you at your heart, if it didn't change your fruits, you know by your fruits. So yes, it could be a bypass. Yes, there's a whole literature on the inflation that can occur during this experience, the sense of narcissism or grandiosity, and that would be the bypass. That wouldn't be doing the work. So yes, it is applicable. And then no, in the sense that these could be genuine peak experiences that have genuinely informed someone's path or personal experience, and then generally changes their life, their relationships, how they view life, how they view their spirituality, and then it becomes, that's I think what they're there for. These aren't recreational or fun compounds. I mean, I know people have fun on them, but they're pretty serious, meaning making and often difficult experiences. So it can be used that way, but in its best, they're not. In its best, it really is, I think, generating a true spiritual path if the person applies it and doesn't take it for kicks at some rave. If it stays in that kind of isolated experience, then yeah, that's not what these are. I don't think they're for kicks. Um, and I think religion has a real purpose here. I mean, I think the containers of religion are wonderful containers or frameworks or whatever we call them to help us connect to the ineffable, to help us connect to that experience through symbols and scripture and techniques and mantras and drawings and mystics and leaders. It seems that's what they're there for, to help once you've had the experience or even without the experience to connect to the ineffable, that they're not the endpoint. What's the Zen thing, the finger pointing at the moon? So I think religions have a really function, a wonderful function of housing these experiences ideally, maintaining it, and then helping connect to it and with all its beautiful frameworks, and also by your fruits then doing good, living a life that's hopefully compassionate. So versus the silos, which is the sad part of religion. the mystical experience is the generator of all the major religions, either by one person or a group of persons over a period of time. But over time, the mystical experience got a bit squeezed out. And so you're left with these beautiful silos with beautiful frameworks and language and scripture and gorgeous readings. But if the mystical ground is now being pushed out of it and you're just left with the silos, then you're missing kind of the core of how they began in the first place. So so that's a long answer to say, yes, it could be used as a bypass. Yes, it could be used as a way, or just used and not really the full impact is integrated. But they could also be, as some would say, sacraments to help support and inform that. So it's both, and people, and our hope is that with the research, these don't just become another just a Prozac or just and certainly not just for kicks. I don't get how they're I get how they're for kicks, but that certainly isn't the way these were developed for throughout the centuries. Only in the last century do we see, and that's the whole 1960s kind of cultural debate where they use recreationally as well. But for millennia, the medicines and more importantly the experiences are part of a life path, right?
Yeah, what I can't understand with that spiritual bypass thing is that any image or any substance, it just depends on how we approach it. Sex can be power. Sex can be connection. Sex can be pleasure. Sex can be reproduction. Food can be anxiety reduction. It can be art. It can. So I just know that given and this is kind of where I was going with that, given the current context that we're coming out of, where there was a pretty repressive, collective repressive approach to psychedelics, we are left with that kind of fear. This is just what Jung called a nothing but. That's nothing but a spiritual bypass, which I totally reject. I think that one needs to look at why, when, how, where they are using anything or connecting with anything, and then they'll be more self-aware as a result. So the thing that we can do now, maybe you intuit where you think we need to go, but I think it'd be cool to start to pick up that thread you were talking about, 1950s, and kind of bring us up to date, maybe a summary of your summary in your chapter, and then we can kind of explore current contexts.
Great, great, thank you, and thank you for your comment. You're right; it's how it's used, and and there's a mystery to all as well. I mean, one final thing before we get into the beautiful timeline, because the 1950s was it's a great chapter in the history of the work. We don't want the takeaway to be, well, people have this with conviction, know where they're, what's happening. That often is the case. People do say, I had this profound insight that this happens to consciousness, or this is what nature of reality is. But often it's also surrendering to the mystery of it all, truly surrendering. I mean, one of the guidelines we give, and I'll get to this when I describe the trials, is to trust the moment, trust yourself, trust consciousness, and go into the unfolding that we don't know. But there's this conviction, and I'm safe, and I'm being held even within the unfolding mystery, and I don't have to know. I mean, the cloud of unknowing. We have all these books and teachings of not knowing. There's a great Zen tale about death that I love, where the Zen student says to the Zen teacher, Master, what happens to us after we die? And the Zen teacher says, I don't know. And the student says, how can you not know? You're the Zen teacher. He goes, that's true, but I'm not a dead Zen teacher. I mean, that, right? I mean, that's the beauty of Zen, right? And of the apophatic theology of Christianity, the not knowing. So thanks for teeing that up. The research history is just wonderful. And for those who are engaged in this new, what they're calling a renaissance, which, I'm not sure if the word applies 100%, or re-emergence, which I like a little better. The first wave was so interesting, and I invite people to look into it. So in the late 1930s, Albert Hofmann discovers LSD by mistake, and I'll do a quick walkthrough.
Please.
In 1943, he accidentally ingests some, then takes it intentionally, and realizes, oh man, I discovered I've stumbled upon a profoundly powerful molecule.
He was on a bike ride, right?
So yes, on one of the early trips, he rode his bike, and it's coming up actually. It's called Bike Day now, and this April 19th or 20th April. I think it's coming up next week. This week. I know we're on tape here. And he realized that he discovered this, and quickly became intrigued by it. This profound altered state that it was dark and troubling, and then became very full of enlightening insights. It was transient. It ended. It passed, and he was back in normal consciousness. And that began a real heady, decade or two. Quickly, he had synthesized LSD, he used LSD for research. There was text in neurology, and it began to be used in a very famous, lovely chapter in Canada by Humphrey Osmond, who was a Brit who came to Canada, began to use LSD with alcoholics, and that began and other psychiatric applications, and that became a real foundational piece of this incredible trajectory. So in the 50s, you have LSD being used in alcoholism. Then in 1957, Gordon Wasson, who was a banker for J.P. Morgan and an amateur mycologist, along with his wife, Valentina, they'd heard about the magic mushroom, which until now, John, is not known in the West, is not known in America and in Europe. But he'd read about this magic mushroom. And he went to Mexico and he met Maria Sabina, a healer, and participated in a mushroom ceremony. Had a profound effect on him. Wrote about it in a very well-known Life magazine article in 1957. That was read by Tim Leary, Richard Alpert, who became Ram Dass, Ralph Metzner. And that kicked off the whole Harvard thing in a profound way, in earnest. And Albert Hoffman, who had discovered LSD, began to synthesize psilocybin from the mushroom. And so now you have psilocybin and LSD being used in some research inquiries. And out of that grew those two main clinical indications: research with LSD, primarily. There was also some other medications being used, but primarily LSD with terminal cancer at Spring Grove in Maryland, and also for alcoholism. Concurrently, these drugs were legal. So it was being used in LSD psychoanalysis throughout the country, LA, New York, primarily big cities, London. Cary Grant, and I invite the listener to Google Cary Grant, LSD. You'll see just pages. There's a movie out called Becoming Cary Grant, a documentary about an hour long, Netflix, I think, or Amazon Prime, where he was going to LSD psychotherapy, where they gave smaller doses. So there were two main models to emerge from that first chapter: psycholytic psychotherapy, which is a small dose of LSD, almost subclinical, to facilitate theoretically the unconscious processes we see in psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, into consciousness to facilitate that process. Then there's a psychedelic model, which was our model that we use today, and they used back then for cancer and alcoholism, which was a higher dose, intentionally set to generate that peak experience, that mystical experience, that profoundly altered state of consciousness. And Cary Grant had participated in the lower dose one and spoke to the day he died, how it changed his life. It's really poignant, by the way. I invite the listener to look it up. Very poignant things he wrote and said about it, that he, until then, was just not a nice person, his words.
He said, I quoted him at the beginning of my dissertation. He said, "These days, everyone wants to be Cary Grant. Even Cary Grant wants to be Cary Grant." Because apparently he had these two personalities that he was in total conflict. And the way that he said the LSD therapy really brought it together. I forget his original name, like Theodore. I forget.
Right.
So he brought these two together and kind of became his own autonomous self, outside of the public's projections onto him.
It's we talked before about fame, one of your interests, your dissertation. Yeah. Because fame just crippled him. He had a traumatic childhood. His mother, he was told, had died, but she really hadn't died. And, it was a very traumatic childhood. But he self-discloses, he was open about it. You can read it online, his narratives, that he was, he would say he was a son of a bitch. I was a womanizer. I wasn't nice to people, to women. I was a self-obsessed bore of a person. I knew nothing. Just incredible, the language. Because for those who are younger in the audience, it's hard to describe who Cary Grant would be today in today's zeitgeist. He would be, I don't know, the George Clooney on steroids. The guy, he was the actor. you know, handsome, and he was like the guy. And so he's self-disclosing these very human flaws that we're all struggling with as we walk this life publicly, and that these experiences, as you said, beautifully, got became integrated into a larger part of who he was. So there was that happening, and then the research took off in the '60s with mainly cancer and alcoholism. And then in 1962 was a very well-known study that I alluded to before briefly, the Good Friday study out of Marsh Chapel in Boston, where Houston Smith, among other students, had a psilocybin experience, guided by Walter Pahnke, a great pioneer, supervised by Tim Leary. um, and they found that experience in 90% of the takers mirrored the mystical experience we see throughout time. And that's when that scale became kind of developed and solidified, that mystical experience questionnaire, that these experiences, and about 2/3 of the people today we find in our research can generate that powerful experience, and they may have some incredible impact on who we are. And then through the 60s, and then 1970, President Nixon uh, made the medicines illegal for the culture. They were legal then, legal in the culture. But also, tragically, also made them out of rendered them out of the hands of research.
Mm-hmm.
And that put a stop within a few years. It took to fully trickle down, but to a promising few decades of research. And never before nor after has a medicine been taken out of the hands of clinical research and healthcare and as a promising medicine because of a cultural phenomena. It would be like today, opioids being taken off the shelf of, opioids are a mainstay of modern medicine, even though there is an abusive component in the culture. And then nothing happened for decades until the reemergence with some research on with Strassman did in the '90s, and then the clinical work with Hopkins and us at NYU and Charlie Grob at UCLA with psilocybin with end of life distress, and now we're seeing this incredible flowering of myriad applications. But that first era is so exciting. Albert Hoffman, then cultural figures like Alan Watts has spoken about it. Aldous Huxley, who was, I consider, the godfather of the research. He wasn't a researcher. He wrote and spoke about it beautifully. He developed his theory of a perennial philosophy that at the core of all the major religions is this mystic core, and that can be generated by these medicines. And the perennial philosophy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, gets a bad rap sometimes, appropriately so. Critics will accuse it of being kind of a watered down, soupy, milky thing of all religions. And I think that's a misreading of it. They're all gorgeous and different in their own frameworks, but and although they're very different, Atman Brahman, one God, Zen has no God, Taoism is very different. There does seem to be, according to the perennialists, and I support this, a common essence that might be that run through all of them in terms of this, although it gets manifested in very different languages. And he pushed that forward in a very strong way. And it was a very heady era, and it affected, of course, our culture and the Beatles and all the rest. So, and then nothing for decades, and here we are in the reemergence. Joe, what are your thoughts on that? Because I'm curious. You being the great thinker you are, the perennial philosophy, it takes a lot of hits, doesn't it? And what it is and what it isn't.
It does, but so I've talked to a lot of people about the spiritual but not religious community, and of course that's emerging in a large way now, because you mentioned Pew studies. We're seeing a lot of changes to organized religion, and people are frustrated by the dogma because I think we're thirsty for the essence. And I have heard a lot of critiques on perennialism, and I certainly align with it. And I think that, I guess my one critique is that oftentimes it takes out some of the hard labor, what they call in the spiritual but not religious. Bill Parsons introduced this idea to me, what they call the grocery store spiritualist or something, that you just kind of pick and choose whatever. There is something to being in a container.
Yep.
And I think that I forget who said that, look, if you're gonna dig dig 1 6 foot deep hole when you're looking for water, not 6 1 foot deep holes.
That's
And
great.
I think there's a paradox here, which is that yes, there is a kind of interior mystical essence, and yet I'm behooved, maybe too strong, to go down a particular lane so that I can actually bounce up against the kind of shit that we need to bounce up to. When you're sitting in a Zen, you get whacked on the head when you do something. In a different container, you'll be guided in a different way, maybe a little more gently. So I certainly have back on my what I kneel down to in my bookstore down here is the perennial. I could pull the perennials philosophy right now, but it makes sense to me intuitively, and I think human beings are so connected at our core. It an easy analog would be the way culture manifests. I mean, while we have different cultures, we all have a culture, and so that's. Thanks for asking. I'm with you. I align philosophically with your lane here, Tony.
Yeah, no, it's intriguing, and the conversation is stimulating, and you're a good company. So I think it's both Ram Dass and Houston Smith who said what you just said. They're copying you, so be careful.
I mean, I will. I'll turn litigious.
They both say what you said. I mean, Houston Smith famously would do a different religion for a period of years. He followed Islam for a while, and of course, Christianity. And Ram Dass, I think, once said, you can't follow them all simultaneously. So pick one and dive deep into it, as long as there's knowledge that they're all connected.
Yeah.
And that's where I think religion gets in trouble. So, yes, you're in your silo, and it's the way to dig deeper, the 6 foot hole, through the wonderful lineage you're involved with. But if the experience is this is the only 6 foot hole, and the other guys don't know what they're doing, then we got trouble. If it's we all meet at the same bottom, then it makes sense. But yeah, the buffet version of picking, could be a bit shallow. Although it's, as I'm sure for you as well, it's fun to integrate a few.
I like
them, but it's almost nice, like after a deep stretch of months of a certain kind of maybe a Christian mystical lineage, then to kind of go to Zen for a bit is almost a bit of a palate cleanser and get back into they're all necessary. So, but that's a great point.
Well, that's Tony. That's my experience. I grew up, I would say, socially Christian, and there was more obligation than anything. It was just kind of what you did.
Right.
But I was more of a spiritualist, and I probably found religion in. Late at night listening to music and I think it would look like partying, but it was I was seeking something. I was seeking deep relationship and deep conversation and radical experiences and certainly art and creativity. But it wasn't until I found Buddhism and I started a pretty devout meditation practice that I found the beauty of contemplation, and that I started to have those subjective experiences of what I would consider to be sacred mystical events in very mundane random, like walking from my car to a class when I looked up one day and saw a bird flying over, and something happened. Like, as that great saying is, enlightenment is an accident, but meditation or mindfulness makes you accident prone. So now I'm able to approach Christianity from, I would consider, a much more mystical space and get into the contemplative aspects of it. And it also allows me to be really frustrated with a lot of the dogmatic bullshit, where there is that kind of colonialist, complete identification with Christianity to the exclusion of all others, which doesn't make any sense to me. Right. So that's one thing I wanted to.
Yeah, no. I mean, we're in the same path there, same lane. For what it's worth, Zen had a very powerful impact on my life, but it helped me inform my own interest. And I think many in the other paths, including Christianity, and of course, Christianity has this great Zen tradition called apophatic theology.
Yes,
more well known to the Eastern Orthodox lineage, I guess, but a similar kind of. I think you are too. Thomas Merton, what a giant, and for the listener as well, his works on Zen and the Birds of Appetite, one of the greatest books ever written. I think it's only a few pages, so everyone
Mm-hmm.
go out and buy it and finish it in it's pretty heavy, so you won't finish it in a day.
He's dense.
But it's very small. But he him and Suzuki, they bridge that. There's a great quote, and I see. Funny you should mention that. So I have a quote. This wasn't a plan, so I just. Thomas Merton says, "I will." He talks about Zen as part of the Gospels. Here he's a modern mystic. Thomas Merton, this contemporary mystic who had a peak experience on a street corner. And what a sad ending, because who knows what he would have been. I think he would have truly helped bridge the insights of Buddhism and Christianity. He was on the cusp of doing that on his last trip before he passed away, and integrated the two. In his Asia Journal is gorgeous about that. But he talks about that. It seems to me that Zen is the very atmosphere of the Gospels, and the Gospels are bursting with it. It is the proper climate for any monk, no matter what kind of monk he may be, I'll say, or she may be. And if I could not breathe Zen, I would probably die of spiritual asphyxiation. And then he says, in this incredible, humbled way, but I still don't know what it is. No matter. I don't know what the air is either. And then I will not be so foolish as to pretend to you that I understand Zen. And then from a Christian mystic, beautiful, to be frank, I hardly understand Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
By Thomas Merton. I mean, that sense of not knowing, that sense of that with Zen, I think, clearly introduced to the world in a profound way. And you're right. Then you go back and you explore the other paths, and they come to life in a new way as well. If you can get around all that, what you call the bullshit of all, it gets so crowded.
Yeah.
The dogma that, so it makes Zen, feel so open. But no, you're right. But and then how do you, develop one path versus and simultaneously appreciate all the others as well. But it seems that's part of the sense of religion. It's hard to, because people often ask, I'm sure they ask you, why do we need religion? Just connect with all that is, the essence. If it's all conscious, whatever, even if it's divinity, why do we need because it's hard to kind of be with just divinity. These forms become nice houses to live in, to connect to the ineffable, right? As a way to, so the Hindus have all these goddesses and gods. You make love with them. They become personified. How do you make love to everything? So it gets personified for the human experience, as long as there's the insight that it's going to the same ineffable, transcendent, whatever we want to call it.
Well, and I gotta say, like when I started playing guitar, I didn't just spontaneously write my own shit. I was modeling them, mimicking them, trying that on. How do I do that? And we know that from a learning perspective, like let me mimic something else for a while until I find where my creativity is. So, and I'm not saying that I need to. I think that oftentimes the dogma, which I don't see as a bad word. I think dogma. Buddhists do a great job of saying dogma is a path. I need a path. Yeah. And the dogma can become restrictive and confining when we start to fall into the belief pattern that is it, and not pointing, as you said earlier, that beautiful point. When I point to the moon, look at the moon, not my finger. And so religion, unfortunately, is a human dynamic that is connected with divinity, and I think that we just sometimes, what does Bela Tov say, that the god of the horses is a horse? We just forget that a lot of times we are seeing our own reflection and mistaking that for the beyond. And I think certainty is the issue here. We've eradicated doubt, which is why I think mystics are very are more comfortable being in a state of unknowing than a lot of I would consider fundamentalists, which have certainty on their side, so to speak.
Yeah, no, you're and that you said doubt again. It's that dancing with doubt that's so intriguing and so powerful when you hear a mystic or a path talking, right? I mean, there's even Zen schools of doubt. They're even called. What's the great one quote? great doubt. No, I'm sorry. Uh, it's no doubt, great doubt, great enlightenment, small doubt, small enlightenment, no doubt, no enlightenment. I
Yeah.
mean, like that's part of the journey, um, and that's that's something, right? To surrender to the is that's one of the I guess tools of it all. Um,
If we can pick up this thread where we've done the tending to the timeline of psychedelics, and now it brings us up to date. So you started talking about 2016, 2007. Um, Current day, I mean, you are at the epicenter of psychedelics in a kind of curative model, or certainly a scientific, but also a religious model. And that's one question that I have to plant later, which is, uh, I'll just ask it now. Are you concerned about the medicalization and exclusively scientific application of psychedelics that lose a certain religious sacramental aspect to it? And with that in mind, what's happening in the current context of psychedelics and for example, the FDA and what's going on in that landscape?
so let me address both. On the first one, and I'll maybe extrapolate the logic to say the spiritual aspects, not just religious, but
Yeah.
the phenomenology of the experience. Yeah, it's I am. I mean, it's an intriguing kind of tension between the two. So, as a quick background, so the mystical experience isn't the only experience people could have. Um, um, we know that can be generated by psychedelics at a high enough level that those higher levels of dosing. But there's also other experiences clearly within the experience. One is kind of like a psychodynamically oriented, biographical, autobiographical revisiting of one's life, and it's limitless, literally, limitless. What can come up, and what can be therapeutic, and maybe that gives me a moment just to say how we do the research. There's
Yeah.
weeks of preparation, getting to know the person, and all the different clinical applications. End of life, doing a life review, and cultivating an intention, why they chose to be in the study, what they want from the experience, really crucial. The intention often can cultivate and direct the experience, to have that in mind and to keep it there. There is the main guidelines are in these 3 weeks of preparation, 2 or 3 weeks of preparation, on the day of the session that I'll describe in a moment, to trust us, the therapists, trust the medicine, as strange as that may sound. Most importantly, trust wisdom, consciousness, trust whatever's happening, and to move in to the unfolding changes in consciousness, no matter what they are. So, sort of like an Vipassana meditative technique. On the day of the session, they lie on a couch in a beautifully living room-like setting with flowers and art and beautiful rug, and they bring in their own items from their life, their own photographs of family or bookshelf, rocks and things they like, and religious items or not, a baseball from Mickey Mantle, whatever was important to them, and they adorn the room with their own materials and photographs, and they spend the day on a couch, most of the time encouraged to lie down, wearing eye shades and wearing headphones that plays a pre-selected 6-hour track of music, mainly classical and background music to help support the trajectory of the experience. And the purpose of both is also to tune out consensus reality, all the stimuli that all this is, and direct attention inward into consciousness. And it's very dramatic. It can come on strong, and a lot can come up. People can revisit various aspects of their life, including traumatic experiences, clinical vignettes, interpersonal memories. They could have profound ontology, more esoteric or transpersonal imagery. They could have dark imagery. They could have challenging moments. And again, the main guidance: go into whatever's coming up, whatever arises, look at it, move into it, engage it. How do I learn from this? Why is this coming up in my mind? um, by running from it, it only can fuel the anxiety. And people in these studies, as dramatic as this may sound, will experience death arising, and we would actually instruct them in advance, even if that arises, move into it. Go ahead and die. You're not going to die. No one's going to die on the couch that day. But by going into the experience, they cultivate, typically, I've never seen a case where this didn't happen in the end, insight or some kind of transformative experience. By moving into it, it changes into this learning experience, which is a lesson for us all in life, right?
Right.
By being with the present unfolding. And so that's the guidance for the day. And they spend, the bulk of the day on this couch, and there are breaks where they have to go to the restroom and get a glass of water. And we're there. There's two guides, typically a male and a female, supporting them, assisting them in very dark, challenging stretches, holding their hand, assure them they're safe, their body is safe, they're medically safe, remind them they're on their medication and they're in this temporarily altered state. And it's a very powerful day. We can come back to this. And then the day ends around 4 or 5 p.m. and they're back in ordinary consciousness, remarkably. And then they go home, and then there's weeks of follow up and what's called now integration, which is simply a discussion of the experience and finding ways to apply that in a real way, so it doesn't remain an isolated experience, but a part of their life. Um, and so that's how the model works in this high dose model. And here we are. So I forget where we're going, but in terms of the current scene, and now there are applications in many clinical arenas. So we're continuing end of life and palliative care. Um, a colleague of mine, Charlie Grove, and I are developing a multi-site palliative care trial. Still about a year away from clinically being on the ground. Um, there are studies in addiction and alcoholism and possibly opiate use, anorexia, eating disorders, depression, PTSD. They're using MDMA, a bit of a different compound, but um, we're even looking at, soon to be not published yet, so it's still in the wraps a bit, but a study looking at the spiritual experiences or the experiences of religious leaders, and again, kind of getting at the phenomenology of the experience. So, in a fast sweep, that's kind of the current landscape. Very exciting. More and more trials being developed. FDA is very supportive when they're done right. I mean, these are very carefully written protocols, and the FDA and the various medical centers have been supportive of these studies, and we're seeing this, flowering of research and of money coming in from private sector mainly to support it.
Mm-hmm.
Government hasn't yet publicly financially supported it, although they clinically support the research so far. Regarding your question, as the field grows, there are these all these experiences people could have on the medicine. There's also ways of looking at it. And going back to your first question, there now is a wonderful neuroscientific inquiry developing what's happening within the brain during these experiences. So you have fMRIs and PET, imagery and imaging going on to look at what's happening in the brain when someone is on a psychedelic like LSD or psilocybin. And that is important. How does the brain shift a bit? What changes? And we know we've known for decades in a large way what changes. In one way, it works along serotonergic pathways and certain receptors in the serotonergic receptor family. But now there's more research. What could it be? And to get to the point of your question, yeah, I mean, I think there's a risk, and everyone wouldn't agree with this because there are different kind of outlooks on it, but that a biological reductionist paradigm or outlook could squeeze out again what's happened to religion 200 years ago, 2,000 years ago. Not that this is a religion by any stretch of the imagination, but could squeeze out the phenomenology of the experience. There's even some researchers, and it's very interesting, I support all research, who say maybe it's not the psychedelic experience that matters. Maybe it's not the memory of the experience, that it's just something happening biologically only. And if we can cultivate, design a molecule that won't have that experience, but it will still change the person. I have to be frank, I don't fully understand that. Some very smart people are advancing that theory. Could we develop a molecule that doesn't have the 4-hour mystical or peak or profound altered state with these insights and teachings and resets? And could it just be a biological phenomenon? I don't get that. Maybe in cases where it's a symptom like OCD or a certain even addiction for a time being, it might reframe the biological foundations of addictive or obsessional behavior. But regarding depression and anxiety and end of life and these other broader clinical indications, it seems apparent that it's the memory of the experience that's changing the person. And that's where this dramatically changes from most all medication. And I think this is the takeaway of the research. This is the paradigm shift. Unlike every other medication or most that people are on, anti-anxiety, antidepressant, pain, whatever people are on, including cholesterol, the medication works while you take it day to day.
Mm-hmm.
So the daily taking of the medicine produces a desired effect. In terms of anxiolytic or the antidepressant, it's clipping it's quieting the symptoms, the edges of depression or anxiety to make it more, you could function, and it quiets down that part. The psychedelic experience is so different. One, you take it once or twice, so there isn't an ongoing biological change. And equally, if not more importantly, you dive into the problem. You move into the suffering. It alters the relationship to suffering. As Jung once said, they asked him, what does psychotherapy do? Does it relieve all suffering? He goes, no, it just changes your relationship to it.
Yeah.
So even end of life, if the entire panoramic field is one of death, with a profound transcendent experience, you may see that sphere of suffering in a much larger landscape. It isn't the entire landscape, it's part of it. There's something more beyond even the suffering that we experience. And these experiences, the whole point of them therapeutically is to have the patient move into the suffering. Whatever it is, earlier trauma, insecurity, end of life, addiction, whatever comes up, and the wisdom of consciousness seems to be have a self-healing mechanism. What comes up is coming up, move into it and learn from it. That seems to be what recalibrates people. But there is this other model which is interesting. So yeah, there is that tension, and I think in a material world that gets a lot of attention. You know, fMRIs and PET scans. It's a sexy headline and an important one. I'm not minimizing neuroscience in any way. Because the brain is incredible, and how do we better understand why it changes, why it shifts like that, and how can we better develop ways to understand it? But as to the causation or whatever's changing this person's outlook on depression or end of life or whatever it is, addiction, it seems to be the memory of the experience. It'd be hard for me to understand that. I'm willing to be taught that a 4-hour change in biology would have a decades-long change in a person's life. Mm-hmm. But there we go. It's really interesting, this landscape. That makes sense? Sorry?
Tons. And it seems like the same... I mean, this is obvious, but it seems like the same arguments that have been ongoing in the world of consciousness are happening here. Of course, you have a deterministic, epiphenomenal kind of understanding of what our subjective experience is, or something else, something where idealism and maybe dual aspect theories tend to come online, which I've been exploring for a number of years, but of course it's going to manifest in this landscape. So you've talked about materialism a bit, and obviously I know where you hang your hat, or I imagine I know where you hang your hat, which is, it seems like to me that, and I don't want to be totally dualistic here, but it seems to me that a lot of materialistic, philosophical folks don't have any room for the other experiences. But when you get into kind of dual aspect theory or certain aspects of idealism, they can live in harmony next to, there's like space made for everybody to coexist. Yeah. So I just think philosophically, I want to be a part of the team that's saying like, hey, let's all coexist and make sense. And you need to do your neuroimaging and your studies, and that's valuable. And, you know, yours actually sits nicely in this worldview, and we can help each other and scratch each other's backs.
Just beautifully. I mean, yeah. How are they not one of the same thing?
Right.
Right. So I agree. I mean, the division, the artificial division, is a problem. Squeezing one or the other out is a bigger problem. I mean, they both are included. Without the brain, understanding the brain, we're not going to have the experience. But let's not minimize the experience. It seems in most of the applications, and again, these experiences that people speaking about. I stood outside of time. I watched samsara. I watched the unfolding of time, whatever that is. I saw beyond my cancer. I experienced love, the deepest aspects of love, which is a very common feature that it was very touching to me to hear people over and over, and all the sites, all the trials. This aspect of love comes up, loving kindness towards self, towards others, forgiveness. I mean, people will report a memory, or not only coming up in that session, but they knew about a trauma going back 50 years, someone abused them or awfully assaulted them, forgiving that person. I mean, because through the transcendent function, they see the layer, they put a lens back, so to speak, and see the layers of how that person got to where they are. And they, that doesn't rationalize it, but it explains or why. I see now their lifetimes of influence, they would say, and why he or she is in that position, and why they did this to me, and I could cultivate forgiveness because we're all, doing the best we can. You hear that over and over, and then you hear this larger, which I think will speak to you as much as it does to me. This They speak of a larger love. I always use, as a proud Greek American, the word agape, this kind of divine sense of that's what the whole ground of being is made of, and that's a very comforting piece to them. So, these vignettes are just very stunning. And we published a paper last year, our team, and 4.5 years later, the people who were surviving with the cancer were re-interviewed. And again, these incredible quotes coming up over and over, and I could read a few later about how it changed my life, connecting with connectedness and connecting with love and forgiveness. And I see my life in a much larger way. And we'll save a few minutes to read some later, over and over. And so it's hard for many of us to exclude that experience. I can't see that happening without the experience.
Right.
But again, to support you on that, it's all part of it. It's all part of it.
Well, you're actually getting to where I'm conscientious of time, and I want to be. I'm so grateful for your generosity here. But it does seem we're in the same lane again, Tony. It does seem like story is a really good place for us to close, or at least to begin to close, because that is subjectivity, that is mythology, that is the whole entire arena that little blips on a screen don't include and aren't able. We can story that story, but that therein lies the issue. We do need to connect to what is happening subjectively. So I'd love for you to share some of those stories, if you would.
That we hear, sure. I'll read you some quotes. And speaking of stories, it's so interesting. What many people speak about in their experience later. So after the experience, an ideal session, there isn't too much talking. We encourage them in advance. If you're experiencing things, don't need to report to us. Just be with it, go into it. If you need us, let us know. We check in periodically. How you doing? Is everything okay? Usually it's like, get away from me. I'm doing fine. Don't talk to me. But then later we talk about it. We hear their story, the word story. And so often it's incredible. And people have often asked, what can we glean from these experiences that happen in non-ordinary consciousness to everyday life, to everyday psychotherapy? And one of them is this, there's many, but they report developing a non-attachment, Buddhist term, to a lot of things, suffering, but also to the stories they tell themselves and little mythologies. And even, I picture like a solar system. They'll talk about, see the little stories, I'm weak, I'm not attractive, I'm a shitty tennis player, I'm a poor, I'm not, whatever, whatever, all the stories you tell each other. Tennis player would be a good one if that was your worst one. And all these little stories, and you realize that's not me. These are stories I tell myself, and they see them, they experience them as drifting away from them. I have all these little mythologies and stories, or death will be this, or I'm a bad person, or whatever it is. And you realize I just tell myself these stories. They're not just me. That's remarkable. I know that's not where you were going with the question, because I want to read you actual stories, but that's stunning to hear people detach from the negative automatic scripts they have, and to see them, I'm something more. As things fall away, their experiences, their identities, even their physical bodies. Ram Dass once spoke famously about that. What's left? If it all falls away, what's left? And that's the exciting part, but challenging part of the journey. If it's all falling away, including this body, that can induce panic. But in these guided sessions or these supported sessions, we're there to help them go towards it. Let's see what's left. Everything's fading away. What's left? And, very often they talk about something very incredible being left, such as love. That's our essence. But Um, that idea of detachment from all these neurotic little things. Not that you come back and they're all gone, but you change your relationship to them. Which again, Jung, I don't know if someone paraphrased him or he once said it, but someone, I think, as I said earlier, said to him, "What is the point of psychoanalysis or psychotherapy?" And not to alleviate suffering, but just to change your relationship to it. And this does that, including death. So the stories are all very touching. I'll read a few quotes from this recent study. There's so many. I mean, there's so many vignettes, and there's hundreds of cases at all the different sites, and each one is more profound than the other. I mean, personal stories of forgiving others in their life, loving, be easier on themselves. These larger transpersonal insights as to what life or death might be. Um, Sense of renewed compassion. But let me read a few quotes. This is a recent study that Gabby Aguilera, one of our team, was the lead author on last year. And this is after 4.5 years, people were recontacted and we re-administered the measures. And we found again, almost 5 years later, that depression, anxiety, demoralization, hopelessness still stay down and still had an increased sense of spiritual well-being. And the survivors, many have, over two-thirds have since passed away from the cancer. In full disclosure, it's not a perfect design in the end because by 5 years, a lot other things have happened in their life, so we're aware of that. But still, we see this dramatic sustainability of the insights. But more importantly, is these vignettes. I'll read just three or four examples. One person says, 5 years later, and you can imagine their first stories, which were incredible. It gave me a different perspective on my life and has helped me to move on with my life and not focus on the possibility of the cancer recurring. This is from a person in remission. I found a greater awareness of a spiritual connection to the universe or of the profound beauty of nature. Another person wrote, it's hard to explain. Something in me softened, and I realized that everyone is just trying to do the best they can, even me, and that matters since we're all connected. Another person wrote, there's a reckoning, this is very touching, which came with my cancer. And this reckoning was enhanced by the psilocybin experience. I have a greater appreciation, a sense of gratitude for being alive, often as a very major theme, just to be here, gratitude for the one life, even the one short life. Once the thought that cancer is part of your life becomes woven into the fabric of your being, you realize that this or something similar awaits many others who are unsuspecting, period. This compels you to relate to everyone from the perspective of compassion due to the changeable and temporary nature of our sense of who we think we are. And I love this. Radical change is just around the corner, regardless of how certain we are of our current state. We are children in our understanding of life until something reaches deep into your heart and announces itself. I understand the life process to be one of realization of a divine nature. This does not mean any supernatural creature. It is a process of remembrance. One person wrote, the psilocybin experience reinforced the understanding that we are all very much together, that the prevailing feeling in the end is one of love. And these go on and on. I often read from Patrick Mettes. He was a volunteer I guided who passed away, a young guy in his 50s, who introduced his wife, Lisa, to Michael Pollan, who wrote about him in his book and his New Yorker article. And he wrote so beautifully, he was a journalist, about his experience. He died a year after the session. And he had his death, rebirth experience, this remarkable experience people report having this ego death and then being born and being born anew, so to speak. I mean, I think that's probably what the Christian to be born again means, to be born again and see life differently. Or to quote, which now got extra new support from Brian Muraresco's book, The Great St. Paul Inscription. If you die before you die, then you won't die when you die. He had one of those, but which I won't go into. But he wrote about love a lot. From here on, he wrote, love was the only consideration, meaning his experience. Everything that was seen or heard centered on love. It is the only purpose. This wasn't some hippy dippy guy. This was a regular button down, regular person. Love seemed to emanate from a single point of light. It was so pure. The sheer joy, the bliss, indescribable. In fact, there are no words to accurately capture my experience, my state, or this place. I've had no earthly pleasure that's come close to this feeling. No sensation, no image of beauty, nothing during my time on earth has felt as joyful and pure and glorious as the height of this journey. And he had a great life. He owned restaurants, he was a musician, he was a well known journalist. Part of his experience was, and I'll close in a moment, he went into his lungs. Often people go into their lungs. In the smoke and cessation trials at
Yeah.
Hopkins, people see the damage they're doing. And there's the insight, what the hell am I doing? I had this one life and this one incredible life on this planet circling the sun. I mean, how did I get here? What is this? And I'm going to shorten it by smoking these cancer sticks, as we called them in the old days. He took a tour of his lungs and he says, I saw my cancer. I could see some things, but as a matter of feeling, he had metastatic cancer at this point. But I was being told, without words, to not worry about the cancer. It's minor in the scheme of things, simply a physical imperfection. It's unimportant. The real work to be done is before you, love. And he closes, it was a long, long journal, but he closed it by saying, my life has changed in ways I may never fully understand, but I have an understanding now, an awareness that goes beyond intellect, that my life, that every life, and all that is the universe equals one thing, love. Patrick reported that experience as the single most spiritual experience of his life, which we is one of the measures we use, and the top five most meaningful. And we hear that over and over. And these are people who've had wonderful lives, having had children, having, a lot of meaningful things have happened. And this always gets ranked in most people um, up in that top single or five most important experience. What is that? Why is this within us? These are questions we all, what is that? You take this medicine and changes consciousness. That happens naturally as well. Let's not forget that. And this is available to us. Those stories are incredible. And then how they people, I mean, he died a year later. Love the way Lisa was very supportive of the work, and to his death, they both attributed his dying well as best you can to the experience. He didn't want to leave his life or his wife or this world, but he wasn't afraid any longer. And we hear that many times, and we hear it now in other disorders. People's PTSD just, is recalibrated. People stop smoking cigarettes. The experience has such an impact. It's so interesting. It's such an interesting time for this research, and we all hope it goes well. To come back to your question of the FDA, and they're very supportive, but some of us, all of us, do worry about the cultural landscape.
Yeah.
50 years ago or more, they were, first of all, they were legal, but the research was very conventional. It could have revolutionized psychiatry, peer-reviewed studies, hundreds of papers, good outcomes. Cary Grant is using it, and then over.
Done.
Decades. Could that happen again? I'm not going to answer that. Maybe it could. It behooves us, the researchers, and what we're doing, proper, ethical, sober research, FDA-approved clinical trials for safety, efficacy, to create a model that works one day, if it's rescheduled for everyone to use on a prescription basis. At specialized centers, not to go to your CVS and get the medicine, but ideally it'll be in centers with trained guides to spend a week or two, have the sessions, and return to your home, like they did at Eleusis, like Hoffman's vision of the Eleusinian mysteries. But the current, landscape with so much going on, it's worrisome sometimes that something could go sideways or south. There's some bad events somewhere that aren't being well controlled, and that could put a pause or a freeze on the research, which would be just awful as we pursue this carefully designed FDA-supported research. So it's an interesting, but in some ways tenuous time.
I'm glad somebody's leading the charge, Tony. My concern might. You mentioned Eleusis, and I mean, I want that.
Yep.
I want that kind of space. I guess part of my concern is that the medicalization piece gobbles it all up, and people are unable to have those kinds of connected with nature in surroundings that aren't so regulated and controlled. But I do know that they need to be held with reverence and with an attitude of the sacred, which is not the rave. I mean, again, there are values to that kind of Dionysian experience, but when we're talking about this, we're talking about approaching it as a sacrament and as something that is sacred. And so my hope is that's where we're heading.
Yeah, and it need not be that language. I mean, I appreciate you using that language, of course, but for some people that rings a certain kind of bell. So we don't need that language. I mean, the famous astronaut Edgar Mitchell, on the way back from the moon in Apollo 14, had a mystical experience, a peak experience, naturally, and he spent he wasn't taking mushrooms on the space capsule, and he spent the rest of his life, the next 40 years, developed an Institute of Noetic Sciences to explore consciousness. So we can use secular language, which is what we use in science. I mean, shift in consciousness, experience, these incredible shifts, and with the various vignettes they have, autobiographical, this peak experience condition. Or you can describe it in the ways you just did, sacred, and which I often do, and I did today. But it's all of it, right? There's a great, Hindu word, neti neti, that where it's people ask, well, what is God? What is consciousness? And neti neti means not this, not that. It's kind of like, it's always the elusive thing. The Tao, the unnameable.
Yeah.
Those who could name the Tao aren't naming the Tao. And so what's the Vedic thing? The more one learns, the less one knows. George Harrison used that for the inner light. George Harrison, great model for this. Using it in a very serious way to change his life, actually. So yeah, it doesn't matter the language we use, but it's about that. Whatever is consciousness is so beyond our understanding, and the bottom line seems to be these medicines temporarily, in a safe setting, if they're personally supported, can produce changes that seem so far to alleviate suffering and produce insights into the possibility of what this is, and it's a great way to end, and it's a great introduction for the next 50 years or 100 years. Where do we go with this? And let's hope it stays on track as we move forward. It's really a very interesting and exciting time.
Well, where do you want to direct people, Tony, in closing? What would you like to let people know about?
Know to direct them to the meditation cushion.
That's as good a spot as any, man. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing to put out there now. I will say, I mean, people are obviously keeping track of all the research and all the media of it. To look at it carefully, be careful of, sometimes it gets sensationalized. One thing to keep in mind for the audience, we hear so much about psychedelics. There's the impression, it leaves the impression it's everywhere and it's even legal. Mm-hmm. And there aren't that many trials going on. We're still kind of in the early stages. So a bit of humility about where we are. And excitement. I hope people stay abreast of the research, of the clinical trials. I imagine it's changed dramatically in the last 2 years. Right. We began the research in 2008, 9 or so. We were FDA approved and approved by the hospital, but it was like we can't even talk about it. Literally, we were afraid, whatever would happen. And now, of course, it's everywhere. So I would just ask people to be careful, as we move forward. And thank you for having me and talking about this. I know you've had a few people on over the weeks or months or years who've talked about these experiences and the medicine. It really is intriguing. It really is intriguing.
Tony, you're a joy to get to know, man. I appreciate you a lot.
Appreciate you. This is a delight. I look forward to the continuation of this conversation offline.
Yeah, more to come offline.
And to your show, I mean, I want to give a shout out to your show. This wasn't a plan. He didn't make me say this, but you're such a good interview. You're we were talking before about how many podcasts there are out there, and it does take a degree of dignity and integrity and a sober look at a topic and a depth-oriented look to make it survive. And you're clearly cultivating that in this incredible space. And your list of guests are just profound. So thank you for this opportunity and for this model. And I guess we could tell people, no more used bookstores, but I'm glad you have the bottom shelf there. But I have memories. I'm sure you do too. Of literally going. I'm a little older than you, so but going to those bookstores and it was the same thing wherever you went. There was that back bookshelf. Drop to your knees. And on the bottom shelf was a little, copies of Be Here Now and of whatever it was.
Let me see. I'm gonna grab one for you. I'm gonna find one. Oh, here you go. There's a good one for you.
Here coming. There it is. There he is. There he is. Yep, that was the bottom shelf. Now it's everywhere. It's remarkable to think of pre-internet, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Remarkable. That does seem to be. Now I'm going offline. You can edit this out later. But there's some as I get older, I have an increasingly romanticized outlook of that what I call a golden period now, of like post World War II until the internet, maybe even the 80s. For so much, I mean, of music, of art, of movie, there's kind of this period, a lot of hardship in the world, but of that era, of that until now it all changed dramatically with digital and all the implications of all this. But that's it's kind of is increasingly receding into history, pre-internet world, and
Robert Johnson wrote about the shadow in his book, Owning Your Own Shadow. And he said that it would take a staff of people to manage a current day household. And because we rely on technology so much, we lose touch with our experience. And I think, we can't stop this train, but we can do things to reconnect with the process where we're not leaning too heavily on technology. One of the ways I do this is I hand grind on my coffee in the morning, and I just want to be connected viscerally with the process. I don't want any other thing to do it for me. But I'm happy that you and I get to connect from New York to Houston in the way that we are.
That's remarkable. And I agree. That's another podcast you'll have somebody on. What is this whole digital age doing to our interconnectedness and spirituality? And clearly, there's a promise there. We're walking around with every piece of knowledge written available to us on a little device.
That's right.
But clearly, there's some potential harm here, obviously, what it's doing to us. But thank you, my friend.
Thank you, my friend. What a joy. I really appreciate you. Control.